Zoe with us this morning, Zoe Lines. And if you remember, some of you will have been to Zoe's talk. In November, she gave a talk on Japan. And in September, she gave a talk on overland adventure, Cuba to Brazil. And I'm delighted that she's come back and is doing another talk for us. And this morning, her talk is about Mexico. And welcome to all of you who will be joining us on YouTube as well. Okay, Zoe, shall I hand over to you?
Some of you may or may not have seen one of my presentations before, so I'll just give a little bit of an introduction. I've always been interested in travel, and I started traveling when I was pretty young, in my very early 20s. And from there, in 2011, I decided to have a career break from work. It was a really big decision, and at first I decided, let's go for sort of something small. So I did 6 months in Asia, and then after I came back, it kind of evolved from there and sort of got bigger and bigger. And 10 years later, or 8-9 years later, I have now completed those travels and have been doing a few talks for Travel Talks Leicester, who I'd like to really thank for inviting me back again. Now, my first thing I would like to say is that throughout all of my talks, the experiences I have are individual to me, and everybody experiences something different. So that's one caveat I would like to just put forward there. And the other is that some of the information that I have got on during the talk today has been sourced from the internet. My trips were some time ago, so I've gone from some notes, but this is all information that I have sourced from somewhere. So you may find that there are differences, and that is particularly important when it comes to things like some of the ancient ruins and things like that. So that's what I'd like to say first of all. Okay, so I went with take a walk in Mexico, and I used the Spanish there. It's quite a common phrase that Mexicans do use. And I've done this because I have always been very conscious of making sure that I have as minimal sort of impact on the environment when I travel as possible. And the one thing with Mexico is that I think if you don't travel locally, if you don't make the effort to get out and walk, to be honest, you miss so much that it was really, really important. I mean, at one point, or to be honest, most days, I was getting out around about 8 o'clock in the morning and coming back probably about 9. So they were really, really long days, and literally that whole day would be walking with some breaks in between for lunch, etc. So I thought that was quite a poignant title to give this particular talk. So I have travelled to Mexico 4 times, and I thought it was 5, but I can't find information on the 5th trip, so it's definitely 4, I think. My first trip was in 2002 to Puerto Vallarta. I was given free flights to anywhere, and I chose Mexico at that point. I flew into Puerto Vallarta and stayed locally, and I stayed locally for the whole 2 weeks. And it was a little bit, I don't know if anybody's watched any American movies, but it was a bit like an American spring break. There were families, but it was literally like lots and lots of young people who had descended on a part of Mexico, and the restaurants were the American version of Mexican, and things like that. So my first experience was more humorous, I think, watching everybody sort of go around, and it was a bit like the English Ibiza, I think. My second trip was in 2014, which was part of this the 8 or 9 years that I was referring to, and I went to Mexico City, Puebla, Oaxaca, Palenque, San Cristobal de las Casas, Mérida, Chichen Itza, Cancun, Playa del Carmen, and Tulum. And that was my largest trip, and that was about that took, I think, about a month, just over. My third trip was in 2017. I went to Mexico City again, Guadalajara, Guanajuato, Leon, Chihuahua, Zacatecas, Creel. And then my fourth trip went to Mexico City and Oaxaca only. And there's a reason for that, which I'll explain later in the presentation. And that was in 2019. So it was actually my last tour before, my last trip before we actually went into lockdown. So if I give you a bit of an idea of those trips. So I flew from Cuba, which was an overland adventure. That was my start from that, which was the 2014 trip. So Puerto Vallarta is here. My second trip, Mexico City, Puebla, Oaxaca, round Palenque, San Cristobal, up to Merida, over to Cancun, down the coast, and then I went into Belize and carried on my trip. And then my third trip was Mexico City. Mexico City, Guadalajara, Leon, and then all the way up to this route to Hermosillo, and then across the American border, and then I went into, I believe, Tucson or Phoenix at the time. And then my fourth trip was just Mexico City down to Oaxaca, back, and then I went off to Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. So Mexico City, I class Mexico as I would probably say my top 5 of destinations that I've ever been to. I really love Mexico City. It's one of the greatest cities, I think, in the world. One of many, but definitely one of my favorites. And the reason for that is that the architecture is true. It stayed very true, I think, to sort of Mexican tradition and Mexican culture for a city. It's also a really good mix of old and new, but nothing's what I call really high rise, except for the more traditional buildings that were built some time ago. A lot of the other buildings, you don't see much of really high-rise buildings, which is really lovely, especially when you're in one of the parks, because it's not overshadowed, and it's a really pleasant experience, and it's a really good view of buildings on the other side of the street. This was the Bellas Artes. It's inside, there's lots of amazing architecture, and it's free to go in to have a look around. And this dome at the top makes the inside here really beautiful when you go in and you look up. It's got like a balcony all the way around on each floor. So just to give you an idea of some of the other architecture and traditional buildings that are in Mexico City, we have the Revolution buildings here, and numerous other buildings that give you, I know that's quite high rise, I know that contradicts what I've just said, but it's still quite an older building and not like some of the more modern buildings that you see in some cities, which is quite nice. And this gives you an idea. Now, when I first arrived into Mexico City, my first time in 2014, I read the Foreign Office website, and it said that there was high risk to being kidnapped, or being attacked. And so I'd come from Cuba, and although Cuba was an amazing place to be, I was quite tired after Cuba, because travel there is a little bit more complicated. So I stayed in my hotel, which was nice and cheap, and that was I stayed in there for about 4 days and had a rest. I just read, I watched telly, yeah, just really relaxed. And then I ventured out, and it was just amazing. And basically I walked all the way, I went out, walked all the way to the main square, which is called the Zocalo, beautiful church there. And it was just really busy, really bustling. And, you know, I really realized that although I needed to be careful, I shouldn't perhaps have taken in the information quite in the way that I did. So what you will find is a lot of the streets, they have these really lovely like little alcoves as you walk along, and there's lots of people usually gathering, drinking with each other, chatting. The Mexican culture is very centered around the family, and you see a lot of families out and about, especially on the weekends or in the evenings. And it's very, very community-based type of culture. So there's always people meeting up. It's really nice to sort of sit down, especially, as I say, in the Zocalo, in the central square, and just watch people as they're going about their business. As you can see, again, some of the architecture, it was just, you could walk along the street and literally there was something different. Every building or every street was quite different. This is one of the insides of the buildings. Lots and lots of effort again on the architecture inside. Very decorative in this area. Lots of columns. It's very grand in a lot of those type of buildings. The one thing you will also find is that you can walk along the street, and it was a little bit like when I lived in Athens. You could walk along, you'd find a ruin, and you'd walk along a bit further, you'd find another ruin, and there was literally, the history was everywhere. And I found that the same in Mexico City. You can see two here, two pictures here of some of the ruins that you have in the area. And as you can see in the backdrop, you've then got here, you've got in the back there, you've got one of the more modern buildings. And they say modern, but still quite old. Mexico City, I put this in because I found this absolutely amazing. I bought, normally I try and not buy too much while I'm traveling, because I then end up having to carry it, but I ended up having to send parcels home. Shopping is just amazing, and it's just such good value. This picture in the middle, they have haberdashery shops, because a lot of people make their own clothes, sort of accessorize, make their own bits of jewelry and things like that, and also put things together for businesses that they will sell on their market stalls. And there's several areas within Mexico City that will actually, it's streets and streets of just selling things. And again, it's really reasonably priced. You've got some of the modern things like the caps and the hats, and then you've got some more traditional crafts. Now, if you want sort of authentic traditional crafts, then it's possibly better to go to places that are further outside of the city, but there are areas that you can hunt out and find something, you know, pretty amazing to go buy there. And a lot of things are different. I bought, I know this, I bought socks and things like that, but they've got really ornate designs that you just wouldn't get in the UK, and tops and things like that, that were unique, that, as I say, that you wouldn't get in the UK. So I really enjoyed the shopping. I don't really want to say that. But the markets are pretty amazing in Mexico generally, but certainly in Mexico City. I really like this because I think it represented Mexico City for me in terms of colour. And I also like this because it also represents the simplicity, being a developing country. They keep their waste to a minimum. So you will find that you will not be given lots and lots of plastic and cartons with your food in. Everything's, as I say, kept quite simple. So for me, that is a help in the environment, which I wholly support. Then we had outside of Mexico City. I mean, as I say, in Mexico City, you've got quite a lot there. And to be honest, you've got one of the most spectacular museums, I think, that I have ever been to. And I've been there twice. It's the National Museum of Anthropology. And I've been, as I say, there twice, 2 whole days as well. And on those 2 occasions, I have not finished on both occasions. Now, I thought, right, the second time I'm determined. I am definitely going to finish it this time. So I went even earlier, and I stupidly started in the same place. What I should have done is reversed it, because then I didn't have enough time and I missed the last 2 rooms again. So I consider that as an opportunity to go back and perhaps finish it next time. It's £2.80 to get in, which is about 80 Mexican pesos. I mean, the population of Mexico is about 127 million nationwide, and then in Mexico City it's nearly 9 million. And I didn't, not at any point did I feel sort of overwhelmed or cramped. I always felt as I had my own space, which was really nice. And the peso is about 28 to the pound. And things were just really, really good value for what you bought. So Xochimilco, these are floating gardens, and you go out on these really beautiful boats with other groups of people, and they take you all along the canal areas, which is a really nice trip outside of Mexico City. And there's lots and lots to do. Something that Mexico is famous for, which you may or may not, and you possibly even know a lot more about it than me, was Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And you see Frida Kahlo on everything: postcards, bags, clothes. And I was aware of her, but certainly going to Mexico, I was inundated with her and Diego Rivera's artwork as well. Now, I did have some pictures of their house, which I went to see, which was on the outskirts again of the city. But I think I've lost, or I can't find a group of photos, and in there is a picture of the house. So I haven't included that, but I did include this particular mural, which is in the Palace des Arts. No, it's not. It's in the Palace Nacional. Yeah. And it's called The History of Mexico. And this is Diego's work, and it is just amazing. As I say, Frida and Diego's work, I've found, is all over the world, and because I became more aware of them in Mexico, I then noticed it a lot more in a lot of the other museums that I visited in other countries. Both of the artists, they married each other, and they had a very tempestuous relationship, which was very well recorded. And Diego was 20 years older than Frida. They got divorced. They got married in 1929. They got divorced in 1939. They then got married a year later. And Frida died before him. She died at 47, and Diego died when he was 70 years old. He died of heart disease, and she died of pneumonia. So that was quite interesting considering the age gap. And their art is generally Cubism, Surrealism, modern art, but definitely worth seeking out if you haven't been aware of them previously. Also, I went to see Leon Trotsky's house, and they were Leon Trotsky was quite well linked to Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And the museum, this is actually where he lived. He was exiled from the Soviet Union in sort of late 1920s. Him and Stalin didn't get on particularly well, and he was assassinated in this house. It's a really, really simple house. I haven't included much about the inside of the museums, and also I haven't included artwork from the National Anthropology Museum because I'm not sure of copyright, so that's why you don't see them in this presentation today. But as I say, it's a really simple life. that he led here, and the garden from pictures looked well maintained when he was there. He was, when he came to Mexico, and this is where I found something, it was a little bit debatable depending on the source, but approximately he moved around Europe, and about 1936, I think, he was forced into asylum into Mexico. And this is near Coyoacan in Mexico City. And because Diego was communist, Marxist communist, him and Frida became quite good friends with Leon and his wife when they arrived, and they invited them to live at the Blue House where they lived. And then I believe that Frida and Leon had an affair, which Leon's wife was not particularly happy about, whereas Frida, I think, and Diego did tend to periodically have affairs, from what I've read. And then that didn't actually, they didn't argue particularly about that. And then a little time later, Diego and Leon argued about something else, and Leon and his wife left and came to live at this particular house. And then there were 2 attempts to kill Leon Trotsky, which the Soviet government denied any involvement with. And then he was assassinated in 1940, as I mentioned, at this house by an ice pick, by a Ramon Mercader, who was supposedly a Spanish communist. But it was really interesting seeing the house of somebody that I'd actually studied during my qualifications while I was at school. So I really enjoyed the historic element of that. So I've mentioned the Zocalo. It's a really, really important part of sometimes daily life for Mexicans. These pictures are from Oaxaca, which I'll come on to shortly, and Mexico City. And as you can see, there's just groups of families. And this might be your average Monday afternoon. And people will be there. They will be selling food, drinks, and a lot of people use it as an opportunity to socialize in those particular areas. You also see quite a lot of buskers, and this is in each city will have, and town will have a Zocalo usually, and you may find these in some of the smaller towns as well. And these are people that dress up like you would get in some UK cities as well, and they create entertainment for a lot of the people that are walking around, and they are really, really popular, especially with the children, which is really lovely to see when they get so excited about it. On from Mexico City, I went to Puebla, which is like a little version of Mexico City. As you can see, a lot of investment is put into the houses. I think that's both financial and emotional. And as you can see in the bottom picture, how clean it is. I very, very rarely saw waste, bins overflowing. A lot of care is taken in virtually every city. I can't remember a time, in fact, where the city wasn't, I saw somewhere that wasn't clean, tidy, well kept. As I mentioned, I go out really early, so I take quite a lot of pictures of the streets very early or very late in the afternoon. And this gives you a good indication of, although it's sort of quite a heavily populated country in comparison to the UK, and it is larger, you find that you can be walking along streets and there's not many people, and it's a really lovely time to go out in the day. It's certainly early in the morning. The other thing that, I mean, the main religion in Mexico is Catholicism, and each church is spectacular in its own way. And I've included these. I know I featured churches in my first tour. There are several things that I am obsessed with when I travel. They are ruins, church, places of worship, and that can be, and also waterfalls. They are my 3 favourite things to seek out usually. As you can see here, very ornate on the exterior and very ornate on the interior. I believe these 2 are the same, as in one does relate to the other. But as you can imagine, with lots and lots of photos and lots of places that I've been to, sometimes the photos get a little bit mixed up. And as you can see on the interior there as well, it is really, really beautiful. The one thing I did find is that even though you may, and churches feature very highly in any town, village, city, you will find a lot to visit. And I tried to get into as many as I could, but even the simple ones are just really well kept. And they're really beautiful. I mean, this picture, oh, let's go back. This picture is, these are not related. And this picture on the, I think it will be your left, the exterior, is really beautiful on the outside. And then you might find on the inside, it's a little bit more basic than when you saw it further down the street, which I think was really interesting. But again, they are just beautiful. They've put so much effort in to keeping them. Now, my next destination I chose to incorporate was Oaxaca. Oaxaca is somewhere I've been to now twice, and I've spent a lot of time in this one particular city, town. It is very traditional Mexican, but it does cater quite heavily for tourists, in that you've got a lot of boutique shops, you've got a lot of art galleries, but it's a really big creative center, in that it attracts a lot of artists from both Mexico and internationally. And they come here to to see a lot of what's on offer, and also to express their art as well. But it does attract a lot of foreign people as well, but I don't think it's overwhelming. You will see a lot during festival times, a lot of people are walking about, but on the whole, on an average day, you see a few people, even though there are quite a lot of people that come to Oaxaca. Now, I am hoping that you get to see this red dot. The brown building, if you go down there, you walk down there, it's a really long road all the way through the center of Oaxaca, city center. And at the bottom of there is the Zocalo, and that is always busy throughout the whole of the day, any day of the week. These are some of the buildings. The church is again one of the larger churches within Oaxaca. And the bottom picture is a desert scene, like a desert garden that is at the back of it's in an older building, and you can just go through one of the archways, and then you can go into that. You can go in free and just walk around, and it's really pretty. So the one thing that Oaxaca is famous for is particular types of food. Now, I am quite particular because I don't eat meat. It means that there are quite a few foods within Mexican culture that I don't eat. But there was never a time where I couldn't find something that I could eat. Oaxaca is particularly famous for mezcal, which is an alcoholic drink. And you will find a lot of families that are linked to somebody who produces mezcal. The other thing, which is something that I have enjoyed eating in the past, is chocolate. They do quite a lot of cacao production, chocolate production within Oaxaca, and you will find that the Mayordomo restaurants, I visited there many times for a hot chocolate, and they use sort of proper chocolate, which was really, really lovely. Now, the top corner of all the bowls, that's called mole. I don't personally like mole, but it is a really popular with both locals and with tourists as well. And on the other picture is something that I do eat, or I have certainly eaten, is empanadas, which is like a pastry type thing with a filling. It's not a pasty, but it's similar-ish. And again, very popular. They're really good for when you're traveling by bus between places, because you can just put them in your bag and take them with you for a longer journey, which is great. Now, there is one particular tour that you can go on from Oaxaca, which is really, really popular, where you visit, I don't know if it's the largest tree in the world, or it's a very large tree called Arbol de Tule. Then you see a ruin called Mitla, and then you see this really spectacular Jueve de Agua, and it's about 35 meters. It's about 35 meters high, I think. No, it's not. That's the other waterfall. So I'm not too sure how high it is. But I didn't go down to the bottom, but it was incorporated as part of the tour. And it is a really beautiful waterfall. And again, it seems in the middle of nowhere. It does take a few hours to get there, but it's now, I believe, closed. They've had to close it off, but I'm not sure if that's due to over tourism or not. Now, the other thing, again, in Oaxaca is their markets. This is a particularly popular market, and I'm not going to pronounce it. A speciality, well, to be honest, something that Mexicans generally like, and you will find it usually in all sorts of areas within Mexico, is chapulines, which is grasshoppers. They're really, really popular in Mexico, which is the bottom picture with the bowls with the brown looking things in. And they're in every single market that I went into. You will find that, and I mean, if you look at the picture in the middle, this was a very usual type of small restaurant, which is really lovely that small businesses get the opportunity. You know, a family little business will run this particular little restaurant, and sometimes people are a little bit afraid, certainly have been in the past, of eating locally, but it was just spotless. Everywhere was just so immaculate, especially in this particular market. Just gives you a sample of some of the foods that you will see at the market. And then it sold everything else as usual, fruits and vegetables, and certainly chilies. That was also something that I saw. A lot of dried chilies, which you know, again, is very popular in Mexico, with the Mexican chili to heat up your food. The other thing that was really popular within Oaxaca was street art. And I found this throughout the whole of South America generally, and Central America, is that there is a lot of time taken and a lot of effort to produce a lot of the street art. Now, the top one of the, I'm going to presume they're perhaps hummingbirds, that was just on the side of one of the main buildings within the centre. And every time I went to the supermarket, I would see the lady with the snake and the eagle. Okay, so as this is where we left off, it's still in Oaxaca, and so we'll move on to the next slide. So while I was in Cuba, again, if you were involved in the first talk, I mentioned that not speaking Spanish in Cuba was actually a bit of a hindrance. So as soon as I got to Mexico and I did a bit of research, I found a school in Oaxaca, and I went there in 2014. And I spent about 2 or 3 weeks there the first time. And it's really lovely. The grounds are beautiful. And you have the main building, which is the picture that you see there, and some surrounding classrooms. And from the schedule that I decided to go for was 30 hours, I think it was. So you get there at 9 o'clock in the morning. You have till midday learning Spanish with a teacher, and that can be in a classroom, and that can be anything from sort of like 2 or 3 people to 4 or 5. I have always been in a class where there have been small sizes, and everyone was really wonderful. And it wasn't very far from my accommodation, and it's my favorite place to stay. That was my favorite place to stay in Oaxaca. It was just such a beautiful sort of 2 or 3 weeks, really calm, really relaxing, even though I was learning at the time. And after lunch, you have some time where you get the opportunity to take part in an activity. And then after that, you will go to a tutor. And that is somebody from locally who would like to practice a bit of their English, and you can practice your Spanish with them as well. And again, I was always matched with some really lovely people from the Oaxaca area. And if you look at the top corner, this is one of the displays that we did for one of the festivals in Oaxaca. And in the bottom, that was me filming for a tourist video. One of the young men at the school, an American young man, had got involved with a local tourist organisation, and they wanted people to appear in the Oaxaca tourist like a promotional video for the area, and that was a really fun day. So at the school, we produced the dulce de camote, which is candied sweet potato, and we also produced the cal veritas de amaranto. And what that is basically a bit like a sugar. You put that in a mold, and then you freeze it, and then you decorate it, and that again is for the festival. I also took part in some dancing lessons when I went the second time. So I then decided on my last visit in 2019 that I was going to primarily go back to that school to learn more Spanish, and also to visit Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. And they were my 2 main reasons for going. That is why I didn't really do much traveling within Mexico, apart from Mexico City, which I'll always spend time in if I'm going into Mexico, really. You had to speak Spanish all throughout the activity, which was really good practice. It was also quite difficult, but it was good practice. Then when I went on to San Cristobal de las Casas, I took a picture of this cake because it was absolutely amazing. And there was not any other reason that I put it in there other than for pure nostalgia. You also had some quirky things in San Cristobal. It was a very small little sort of town village, and it was at elevation, and it was actually quite cold when I went. And this is just one of the vehicles that's quite quirky. That was I actually quite like it. But and as you can see, these are traditional streets, and again very similar, even a lot of similarities to Mexico City. If you go down some of the suburb areas, you would find that a lot more people in indigenous outfits would come into these smaller villages, which you would see walking along, which was really, really interesting. You've got all the shops. As I said, it's not high rise. You don't see sort of big brand names that are over everywhere, and you can buy some really interesting little things to take home. Again, I mentioned I like churches, so I particularly like this one because it was slightly different to a lot of the others in San Cristobal. The other reason for going to San Cristobal was to go to Sumidero Canyon. It was an amazing day trip, and as you can see, there were lots of waterfalls to spark my interest there. I also saw quite a few people fishing locally, a lot of the locals fishing, and again, it was a really small tour. I personally don't like tours. I will only do a tour if it's the only way that I can really do something, or if I'm really, really limited on time, which I try to avoid, but there have been the odd occasions. But this was, again, a really lovely little tour. There's a nice picture of me somewhere with all of the safety gear on. And on this tour, as you can see, lovely waterfall just coming down from the edges of the canyon, and we saw a crocodile, which was pretty interesting. We saw quite a few, but they are particularly prominent in this area. Then I went to Playa del Carmen, and I took a picture of this because I thought it represented me at that time. I was absolutely exhausted. I did go to Cancun before this. I'd heard quite a bit about Cancun, and I planned to do some diving at the time, but I then changed my mind when I got there and decided I wanted to take a bit of a rest, or I'd come down to Playa del Carmen. Cancun's very built up, and there are a lot of big hotels. So I only stayed literally a couple of days. I have a friend who's stayed there for quite a long time before. So you can obviously find some areas that certainly, you know, within your interests. So I went to Playa del Carmen. Again, it's very, it was a little bit like Puerto Vallarta, in it there was a lot of sort of Americanized restaurants or tourist restaurants, and a lot of boutique expensive shops. But I found a really lovely little place to stay that was sort of away from the front. And I did plan to do some diving, didn't find an operator I wanted to go with at that time, but I thought, well, possibly come back. But there was lots and lots of children that were doing, I think, making molds in the sand, and I really like this one, so I put that in. That really does remind me of me at that time. And as I mentioned, lots of families. Although this was there were a lot of tourists in the area, what I really liked was that the locals also used all the beaches. They didn't, you know, it was a communal area that everybody used, which I also really liked. This man was fishing with his children, and they were just running all over the place, and it was just such a joy to see them there. So I didn't do much in Playa del Carmen, to be honest. It was very much more relaxing, moving around, eating more foods that I'm perhaps more familiar with from back home. Then I went on to the ruins. Now I've grouped all the ruins together. I've picked out my favourites so far, and some of these have quite important significant, well, they all have important significance, but these are some of the main ones, but also a few that not so many people went to. And I did find that in both Mexico and Guatemala, it was quite easy to find some of the ruins that not many people actually made the effort to go to, or it was a bit more out of the way and things like that. It was a bit more difficult for people to get to. Now, I left, this is about 30 kilometers outside of Mexico City. And it was a bit funny because this is during my could I get robbed and things like that. So what I decided to do was leave my more professional camera back in the hotel, secretly stashed on top of a wardrobe right at the very back. And what I did was I took my little just point and shoot camera, excuse me, and it was funny because we got on the bus at Mexico City, and they videoed every single person that got on, and they asked you for ID and everything. Okay, so I left as much as I could back in the hotel, but I took a few bits, ID, etc., because they'd like to, they like it that they can identify who you are. So we all got on, we set off, and then we got to the next stop, videoed every person getting on the bus. I thought, right, this is great. I feel pretty secure. There had been issues, I think, in the past where people had been robbed on some of the buses that went, especially to this, to Teotihuacan. Then we got to, then the bus driver stopped. I thought, oh, what's going on here? Because there was no bus station or anything. And literally just loads of people got on, and it was all really, really crowded. Then we stopped again and more people got on. No video camera, no nothing. So I don't know whether it was a bit of a token gesture outside of the city, or whether it was just, oh, well, hopefully it'll be all okay from here. But I had no issues at all. And nobody even got on that I felt, you know, a bit concerned about. Everybody was really friendly. And so I just thought I'd mention that because it did make me laugh. So this is Mesoamerican City. And the dates, I think, differ from different sources. It's possibly 400 BC. And it was the most powerful in the region up to from around about up to 400 AD. The Aztecs found the city in the 1400s, but it had been abandoned for years. And a lot of the ruins, although a lot of them were abandoned and there was grass, trees, etc., growing on some of them, and you can see that in some of the more remote ruins, but these are so well kept, as you can see, spotless. There was no litter virtually anywhere unless somebody just accidentally drop something. They're really well maintained, really well kept. As you can see from this picture, it's one of the more popular temples, as you can see from people there, but again, it's still not that busy. And the name was given to the area later on, I believe, and it's a grid layout, and it's about 8 square miles. It's a really, really large area to walk around. And I try to get to as much as of the whole of the area as I can. And you've got plazas, pyramids, palaces, and you will find there are a lot of similarities with a lot of the ruins. You'll have the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, and then you will also, in this one, you had the Citadel as well. Now, Palenque was the next ruin that I will mention. Now, I did take this picture. It's not super clear, but it does give you an idea of the layout. Again, Palenque was really, was quite spread out there. And the one thing I liked about Palenque was it was quite big. And again, there wasn't many people there. So it was really, really calm, really, really quiet, traveling around the sites. Got some amazing photos. It was occupied approximately 226 BC to 800 approximately AD. And it's again another Mayan city, and it's the name of the neighboring village, but that I think they don't believe that was its original name. And the one thing that's unique about here is a plaster finish instead of limestone, which is what a lot of the other ruins are. And as you can see, look how well it's been preserved and reconstructed. This one was quite unusual because we got to go inside one of the temple areas, and that was a bit more unusual. I don't remember any others that I got this opportunity. The next, as I mentioned, do like waterfalls. We've got the Agua Azul and the Misoha, which is again, it was all part of, was it part of the same tour, or did I'm not 100% sure, I might have done it on different days. And the big waterfall is the Misoha, and that's about 35 meters. And then the other one, I believe, is the Agua Azul, and that was a series of different waterfalls, and you walked up the side and you could take pictures of it all the way up. And this was one of the particularly nice areas, the way that the cascades down there. And then you've got the bigger one, and that's, I believe, part of the Agua Azul as well. The next temple I included was the Rutapuk. Now, the reason I included this temple was that you can't actually go to this particular series of ruins without a tour or having your own car, and it made it quite prohibitively expensive for me to do that. However, I then found locally that there was a government bus, and it was about £1, 20 pesos or so, a bit less. And what they did is they take you out really early. You go to 3 of the ruins, the Puk, the Kaaba, and the Uxjamal, and there is, it goes out on a government bus. They stop at the 3 places. They give you a reasonable amount of time actually at each place, because I thought I'll try it. It wasn't too expensive. I'll try it, see how I go. And the other thing was that they don't visit any of the tourist restaurants or tourist shops and sometimes unnecessary areas to promote business. And I really like that. And everybody on the trip was Mexican. So it was really nice communicating and connecting with those people, and then getting off, going and doing what I wanted to do, and then come back. And I took my own packed lunch. I could then, because I don't particularly like to spend lots and lots of, I prefer to see rather than to be sitting there eating my lunch. So I literally just sat on the sides of one of the temples and ate my food there. And it was a really amazing experience going to this particular set of ruins. And they were massive. As you can see, the temples are really spectacular. And also even the smaller ones that are, again, well preserved, when you see all of the decoration and the relief around them, it is pretty amazing. Again, there we also have a little iguana. down here, and they were all over this temple, and I was following them, and I got absolutely loads of photos. I love taking pictures of nature. Sometimes it's quite difficult, especially if you're visiting a series of cities as well. But the one thing I really liked about Mexico is near enough all of the ruins are in the middle of nowhere to a certain extent, and there's just loads of landscape all around. As you can see here, this is the relief. It's so well crafted, and it's so beautiful all the way around it. Now you do have the pile of stones up in the top. I'm presuming, I didn't see this very often, but I think with some of them, they just literally don't know where they go, or they perhaps run out of anything, I don't know. But it wasn't very often that I actually saw that. And then, as you can see, you've got the really large tower in the other picture. There was always a lot of walking. Again, the reason I called the tour what I did. And this shows you how the landscapes from the temples. And as you can see, it looks literally as though you are in the middle of nowhere. And every single ruin that I went to, apart from those that are actually based in the city, like the ones I showed you at the beginning, were always such spectacular scenery. Even if it was just green, it was just always amazing, especially when you could then look back at the ruin and take the photos from there. Now, this is one of the most famous temples in Mexico, and I've included it because I decided that I prefer to take, although I like to mix with everyone, I prefer with a lot of my photos to really get detail. I like to take photos where there are people in it, but I also like to take photos where there's nobody in it, so you can get a really good perspective of what you're taking, what you're photographing. What I did with Chichen Itza is I stayed in a small village called Piste, and I had a pack, and it was quite a reasonable pack, probably about 20 kilos. And the only way you could get from this village to Chichen Itza was to walk. So I walked 2.5 kilometers, which isn't a lot for me, but again, you know, a bit of a walk with a pack. And I walked from that small village to Chichen Itza, and I got there before, I think there was 3 of us in the queue, a Mexican couple and me. I went in, and I literally had about an hour and a half before anyone else, many other people arrived. And as you can see, that early in the morning gave you a really good backdrop for taking photos and colour for those. So this is about 4 square miles. It was for religious, commercial, military and political centre. It was a political centre, and it was a home at its peak to around about 35,000 people, and occupied, I believe, longer than some of the others that I've mentioned. It's about 200 pesos to get in. So even though it was more, it was completely worth it, and it still wasn't that expensive. So budget-wise in Mexico, I did really, really well. Even the accommodation that I stayed in was just amazing for the price that I was paying. And it was always so, I can't remember an instance, actually only once in Mexico City when I stayed in an absolutely awful place that I actually left and didn't stay the night, and that was horrible. But I deviated from the place I usually stay in Mexico City. And that is the only place that wasn't very nice. And there we go. And this big temple is called the El Castillo, and it's 365 steps to the top. Again, spectacular view. I rushed up so that I could do it before there were too many people about. And you can see in this bottom corner, there's a gentleman coming in with all of his bits. Now, the one thing with Chichen Itza, because it's such a big tourist draw, and I totally understand it, but what you did find is about an hour and a half after, so about 10:30, 11ish, a lot of the vendors would arrive, and every single area was taken up then with a vendor, and they were selling all of their tourist items, all sorts of different things that somebody may want to purchase, well, obviously do want to purchase, otherwise they wouldn't be there. but it did mean that then a lot of places you would have to take a photo, and there would be vendors in it as well. So I'm really, really pleased I went early. So I rushed around, took all my photos, and then did the whole thing again, spent the whole day literally there, and then got a bus to the local city, Valladolid. You could put your backpack in a secure, like a locker, which is really good because a lot of places don't have anything big enough for a big backpack. But I did my research beforehand and found that I could do that, which is why I stayed locally. And I would totally recommend that if you have the flexibility to do that and you're prepared to walk the distance. Now this is quite, they have these in quite a lot of the ruins. It's a ball court, and it's a main game called Poc Ta Poc. This one is one of the largest in the Americas. It's 545 feet and 225 meters in width. Don't ask me what the game is, I don't really know, but it was popular with Mayans many, many years ago. So my last ruin is Tulum. Now this is one of the, I don't know if it's the only one on the coast, but this is as you get over onto the coast. When I came down from Playa del Carmen, I went here. Now the one thing with Tulum is it is intense heat and there is no shade, not even from the, it was funny because we would, if you got to a particular temple and there was literally a small square, you'd find loads of people would just standing in this small square having a chat because there was just no shade and it was relentless. The heat was relentless, but it was, again, I spent hours there, but it was quite amusing. And that's the map of the area, a lot smaller area. And the picture at the bottom, you did see a lot more waste being, I don't know if you can see from the picture, but you can see a lot more waste that has been washed up on the shore, and you did see a little bit more of that, which again just demonstrates the desecration really we're doing to the ocean at the moment. So nice thing here is you got there was the ruins, and then you had the outskirt area, and it was a bit closer to town, but you could still see lots of vegetation, which again made it felt quite magical, I think, in every single ruin I went to. And then Tulum, again, quite low rise this one, because there again wasn't really too much there in comparison to some of the others, but a very, very popular one because a lot of people travel down from Cancun to see Tulum because it's not very far. So it was really, really busy, although I went early again. And again, some wildlife. I did look up what they were, but I can't get the exact. They're iguanas, I believe, but these are two different types, I think. So I wasn't too sure which one was which. So the last but one thing, like penultimate thing to mention was my favorite festival anywhere in the world so far, was the Dia de los Muertos. I celebrated this twice, once on my 2014 trip and then once on my 2019 trip. And again, another reason for why I went back in October to study Spanish was to actually incorporate specifically this festival. It happens on the 1st and 2nd of November all over Mexico, but they celebrate it usually with small parades, etc. Sometimes a few weeks before, but certainly in the build up to it, the like 5 or 6 days before. It's not Halloween. It is a celebration of those that have died, but with love and respect, not in a solemn way. So there's loads of music, parades, parties, dressing up, decorations, costumes, makeup. You on the 1st and the 2nd, what you will do is they will decorate the cemeteries, and then you would go with your family morning, noon and night, but specifically at night, and you would go there and you would celebrate people's lives from members of your family, friends, etc. I thought what was quite interesting was that it was a festival that had been recognised by the UNESCO for intangible cultural heritage and humanity, which I thought was really, really interesting. And that was in 2008. So here what you do is you find that people will set up stalls. They may sell food that they produce themselves, or it may be that they will set up the stall and their family will sit there during the course of the day and celebrate with them, with friends and family. And you will have an altar and you will put food on that, or decoration, or the skulls that you saw me make at the school. And everything looks really lovely and pretty. And here we have a group of people that allowed me to take their photo in all their traditional costume for the day. And there's lots of music. The Zocalo comes to completely to life during this time, and you'll hear music throughout the day, as I say, for usually about a week before. These are from Merida, where I celebrated Dia de los Muertos for the first time. And then at night, everybody will dress up again, either in a different costume, or they'll keep the traditional dress, but they'll put some form of skull look on their face. And here we go. And everybody was just so welcoming and really encouraging you to get involved, and really made so much effort. Now, this is in Oaxaca, and this is a few days before, and every district will have a parade. The children get involved, and it's a really big thing. And they will walk through the streets, and you try and grab the photos. Then they'll have a main parade, usually on the 1st, I think it is. And then on the 2nd, or possibly the 2nd, or both. And this is in Oaxaca. Oaxaca, although there everywhere celebrates it, but there are some cities and towns that are particularly noted for the celebration. One of them is Merida, Oaxaca, and then several others. But I chose to celebrate in these two initially. And then again, and these two photos, not the one during the day, the other two, this is part of the parade. It started about 45 minutes late, but there are so many people involved in it. I understood by the time it came round to it. And this was really amazing. This was the end of the parade. So this is the ladies when they are taking part in the parade, and then they come to a small area. This was this second parade that I caught in Oaxaca for that night. It was difficult to find out what was going on and where, because so much was going on. And then they ended in a smaller square further away from the main square. And there was loads of music for the rest of the night. And each group from the parade would come in, they would stand there, everyone would take photos and cheer, and then they would move on, and someone else from the parade, another group from the parade would come in. And these are the way that the shops would actually, I mean, the one in the top corner with the bikes outside, they have just, they have decorated the whole of the front. Now, I believe that is actually year round, but I may be wrong on that. And then the one at the bottom with the big skull face, that is just a temporary thing for a temporary decoration for the actual event. But they sell food. I even went to a dog show. There was a little dog show in one of actually just outside the cafe that's got all the gel, the bikes outside. Now, my last part of this presentation is Copper Canyon. On my third trip, I went specifically, this was one of the main features. I think it contends particularly well with the Grand Canyon in America. And the reason for that is because there is no tourism, notable tourism around the area. It is literally as natural as you could virtually get. However, as we see here, it's just stunning scenery, very, very hot. I walked all the way from my accommodation, because I had to go and stay somewhere quite close, which took about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to here. And these are some of the canyon. And I went here more for the views, but also because of the extreme sport. So I did several extreme sports here. I did zip lining, and they were over the canyon. I then did a via ferrata, which is where you climb around the rocks. And then I did the longest zip line in the world, which is just one zip line. They were pretty interesting. These are some of the bridges you come over, and that is the harness that I had to wear. Okay, now I have got some videos to show you. One of them is the zip line, and a couple of them are for the Dia de los Muertos. A little bit of music on that. So that's the end of the presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe. Thanks for sharing in such a lovely, relaxed way. Thank you. It's great the way you get so much out of the day, isn't it? And I guess you're right, the secret is to start early, isn't it? Especially where it's hot.
This is one of my favourite dances.
Yeah, it's very nice, isn't it?
The music. Sorry. This is one.
Yeah.
I've got another one of
Lovely,
those.
isn't it? That's lovely, Zoe. Thank you so much for that.